She was sitting in her car in the parking lot when Sylvia crossed the asphalt toward her. Silk dress. Heels on concrete. The same woman who had just told 37 people that Ruth had no business being there. Ruth watched her come. She did not start the engine. She did not call anyone. She just opened her navy notebook to the first page, and she waited, because everything Sylvia needed to save that wedding was in Ruth's lap. And Sylvia was about to find out exactly what it costs to throw away the person who built the thing you're trying to protect. The morning of my ex-husband's wedding was a Saturday in April. I remember the drive out to the venue, a converted estate house about 40 minutes from the city, the kind of place that rents itself to people who want their occasions to look inevitable. Stone facade. Gravel drive. White tents visible in the garden as you turned in from the road. I had made that drive 11 times in the past 4 months. I knew where the service entrance was. I knew which vendor came first and which came last. I knew the name of every person I would need to speak to before 10 o'clock. I was not nervous. That is the thing I want you to understand from the beginning. I was not nervous at all. I parked in the staff area, not the guest lot, and I took my navy notebook from the passenger seat and I walked around to the loading dock. The florist was already there. 2 vans, back doors open, someone lifting white lilies from a refrigerated interior. The scent hit me before I saw them, clean and cold and very formal, the kind of flower that announces something is important before the important thing has even begun. Mrs. Whitfield. The assistant checked her clipboard. Sign-in sheets right here. I signed. She handed me the morning authorization sheet. I reviewed it, confirmed the load sequence, initialed the bottom. That was why I was there. To do exactly that and 11 other versions of exactly that before 9 o'clock. I went inside through the service corridor. The entrance hall of that venue is oak-paneled, tall-windowed, the kind of room that holds light like a cathedral. Morning sun was coming through the east-facing glass, laying itself across the floor in long pale rectangles. A catering cart had just arrived near the far wall, fresh coffee, the smell of it warm and domestic against all that formal stone. Through the garden doors, I could hear chairs being arranged. The low scrape of them on flagstone. Staff in black moving with the quiet efficiency of people who have set up 1,000 mornings like this one. Everything was not yet real in the way that wedding mornings are not yet real. The way a stage feels before anyone takes their position. I had my notebook open to the vendor contact page. I was looking for the catering manager's name when I heard the footsteps. Not quick. Not loud. The measured pace of a woman who has never needed to hurry in order to arrive. I looked up. Sylvia Whitfield was 78 years old, and she dressed like a woman who understood that presentation was a form of argument. Champagne silk. Hairset. A small brooch at the collar that I recognized. She had worn it to Daniel's first gallery opening 24 years ago. She saw me in the same moment I saw her. And what crossed her face was not anger. I want to be precise about that. Anger implies surprise. What Sylvia felt was something older and more practiced than surprise. It was reflex. She had been making decisions about who belonged in her family for 50 years. She made one now. She did not pull me aside. She did not lower her voice. She walked toward me across that entrance hall, and she positioned herself so that the guests who had begun filtering through the main doors could see her face and mine and the space between us. There were 37 people in that room. I know this because the venue coordinator confirmed it afterward. Sylvia looked at me with an expression I had seen many times, patient, composed, faintly sorrowful, the look of a woman performing reluctant necessity, and she said, "Ruth, this isn't appropriate." I held my notebook. I don't know what Daniel told you, she continued, but showing up here today to his wedding, it's embarrassing. For you, more than anyone. Someone near the catering cart had gone very still. The family has moved on, Ruth. It's time for you to do the same. I think, deep down, you know that. Her voice was pleasant, conversational. The kind of voice that sounds, to anyone listening, like kindness. I know how it sounds. I had been listening to it for 28 years. She took one step closer. Just one. If you don't leave now, I'll need to ask someone to help you out. And I don't want that for you. I really don't. You've always been a lovely woman. A small pause. You've just never quite understood what it means to be part of a family like ours. There it was. The sentence I had heard at dinner tables and Christmas mornings and in rooms full of people who nodded along because they had no reason not to. Lovely. But not quite. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I closed my notebook, tucked it under my arm, and walked back the way I came. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain myself. I did not look at the 37 people who were watching. I walked through the entrance hall and out through the service corridor and across the gravel car park. My heels were practical enough for gravel. I had thought about that, and I got into my car. I did not slam the door. I want you to hold on to that silence. The silence of 37 people watching a woman leave a room and not one of them following. Not one voice calling after her. Not a hand on a shoulder. Not a single person who said, wait, who said, hold on, who said, something is wrong with this picture. The room simply closed over the space where she had been. The morning resumed. Someone laughed, softly, near the catering cart. A chair scraped in the garden. In 28 years of that family, Ruth had heard that silence before. At dinner tables. At her own children's school events. At Christmas, when something she had organized was praised and the praise went somewhere else. The silence of a room that had already decided who mattered. It was the oldest part of this story. She just didn't know yet how long it had been running. She sat down in her car, and she placed the notebook in her lap, navy leather, worn at the corners, the kind that costs a little more than a notebook should and lasts because of it, and she did not start the engine. And if you are wondering why a woman who had just been publicly humiliated in front of 37 people was not driving away, if you are wondering why she looked almost calm, then you need to understand something about Ruth Whitfield. She had not come to that venue as a guest. And what she had in that notebook was the only reason there was going to be a wedding at all. I sat in that car for a long time before I started the engine. Not because I was deciding anything. Not because I was composing myself or looking for words or replaying the scene in the entrance hall and wishing I had said something different. I sat because I was remembering. Memory is a strange thing when you are sitting very still. It does not move in order. It moves in weight. The heaviest things surface first. And what surfaced, sitting in that car park with the morning sun warming the windshield and a navy notebook in my lap, was not that morning. It was Christmas, 1994. The Whitfield family dining room in December smelled like wood smoke and cinnamon and something underneath both of those old money, I used to think. Which sounds ridiculous, but is actually just the smell of a house that has been heated and maintained and cared for over many decades. Good candles. Real ones, lit at 4 in the afternoon even though it wasn't dark yet, because Sylvia believed in setting a mood before the occasion required it. I had been in that family for 3 months. Daniel and I had married in September, small, practical, mine and his together, neither of us needing much ceremony. His mother had attended with graciousness and a gift that cost more than our honeymoon. I brought a dish to that Christmas dinner. My grandmother's recipe, something I had been making since I was 9 years old, something that belonged to the Morrison side of me the way certain things belong to the women who teach them to you. I had spent 3 weeks perfecting it for that table. Sylvia tasted it. She set down her fork. She looked around the room, at Daniel, at his 2 cousins, at the family friends who filled out the long table every year, and she smiled the smile I would spend the next 2 decades learning to read. How lovely, she said. Ruth is still getting to know what we like. The table laughed. Not cruelly, just easily. The way you laugh when someone with authority says something that sounds like affection. Daniel laughed. I smiled. I brought that dish home at the end of the night, and I never brought it again. And the line she used, Ruth is a lovely woman. She just never quite understood what it means to be part of a family like ours. I heard it for the first time at that table. Said to Daniel's cousin after dinner in the kitchen when she thought I was in the other room. I was in the hallway. I heard every word. At the time, I told myself she was simply proud of her family. At the time, that explanation was enough. By 1998, Daniel's architecture firm was growing. He was talented, genuinely talented, the kind of spatial imagination that translates directly into buildings people want to be inside. What he was less talented at was the business of running a firm. That was where I came in. I built the financial management system for Whitfield Architecture from a second-hand desk in the corner of the office. No title, no salary. We had a young son, and I was 3 months pregnant with our second child, and I worked from home in the mornings and drove in 3 afternoons a week and sat at that desk, which had no nameplate, because I had not thought to ask for one and no one had thought to offer. And I built a system that made the firm fundable. The first major contract came through in November. A commercial project, mid-city, the kind that puts a firm on the map. My financial modeling had made it possible to bid competitively. I knew this. Daniel knew this. We did not discuss it in those terms because we did not discuss things in those terms. We were a team, I thought, and teams do not keep score. Sylvia hosted a dinner to celebrate. She stood at the head of her dining room table, the same candles, and raised her glass and said, "To Daniel, and to everything this family has built." I was at that dinner. I refilled the wine. In 2004, our son Marcus was struggling. He was 8 years old and disappearing inside a school system that had misread him, and the misread was compounding, and by spring of that year I was driving 40 minutes each way to attend my 12th meeting with teachers, with specialists, with a district coordinator who kept using the word behavioral when the word she needed was undiagnosed, was driving 40 minutes each way to attend my 12th meeting with 3 separate specialists to get a correct diagnosis and a support plan that actually fit who he was. Daniel attended 2 of those 12 meetings. By Thanksgiving of that year, Marcus was doing better. Genuinely better, the kind of better that is visible and measurable and makes a mother feel, for the first time in months, like she can breathe. At the Thanksgiving table, Sylvia looked around the room and said, "Marcus is just thriving." I think what made the difference was Daniel's commitment to finding the right help. Daniel nodded. He did not correct her. I cut another piece of turkey and put it on my plate and reached across to refill someone's water glass. I told myself, she simply doesn't know the details. She simply assumed. That explanation was enough. For a while. The lake house renovation began in the summer of 2011. The property had been in the Whitfield family for 30 years, a lakefront house in Michigan that had not been meaningfully updated since the early 90s. It needed everything. New plumbing, new electrical, a structural repair to the back foundation, a full interior rebuild. The lake view was extraordinary. The building was quietly failing. Sylvia wanted it saved. Daniel wanted it saved. Neither of them had the time or the organizational capacity to manage a project of that size. I did. I spent 14 months on that renovation. 2 full summers driving 4 hours each way, sometimes twice a week. I ate sandwiches in the car. I fielded contractor calls at 11 at night and 7 in the morning. I managed $340,000 across a rotating roster of contractors and suppliers and county permit offices, and I did it without a single overrun. I have the invoices. I have the permits. Every decision documented. My name on every line. When it was finished, Sylvia hosted a gathering. Family and close friends, a weekend at the completed house. She walked people through the rooms and talked about the lake light and the restored original woodwork and the new kitchen that opened onto the back porch. In her toast that evening, she described the renovation as something she and Daniel had been dreaming of for years. She said she was grateful to everyone who had helped make it possible. She looked around the room with that practiced warmth at Daniel, at the cousins, at the friends who had driven 4 hours to be there, and she said nothing else. I was standing 12 feet away. A guest turned to me. A woman I had met twice before, Daniel's colleague's wife, someone with a kind face and no reason to know anything. "Have you seen what they've done with the place?" she asked. "Isn't it remarkable?" I looked at her. "Yes," I said. "I have." I didn't say anything else. If you have ever done the work and watched someone else take the bow, not a stranger, not a colleague, but someone in your own family, someone who ate at your table and knew exactly what you had given, I need you to know that Ruth stood in that room for 3 more hours after that moment. She refilled glasses. She complimented the view. She smiled the smile she had been practicing since 1994. She smiled until her face was tired. And if that is familiar to you, if you know the particular exhaustion of performing warmth in a room where your own work has just been handed to someone else, leave a comment. Because that kind of tired has a name. And I think you already know what it is. If you found this channel today and you are not sure yet whether to stay, this is what we do here. We tell the truth about families. The slow kind of truth. The kind that takes 28 years to become visible. Subscribe. Because this story is not even close to the most complicated part yet. And you are going to want to be here when it gets there. For 28 years, Ruth told herself that Sylvia was difficult. That Sylvia was competitive. That Sylvia was the kind of woman who needed to be the most important person in any room she occupied. She told herself this was personality, not policy. She told herself this until the day she opened an email that was not meant for her and understood, for the first time, that she had been watching a strategy. Not a personality, a strategy. And it had been running since before she ever walked into that house. Daniel called on a Tuesday evening in November. I remember because I was doing exactly what I do on Tuesday evenings, sitting at my desk in the home office, working through a reconciliation spreadsheet for a small nonprofit I consult for. The lamp was on. The tea was half drunk and going cold. Outside, the neighborhood was doing the quiet thing it does in November, when the leaves are finished and the dark comes early and everything settles into itself. His name on my phone screen was not a surprise. We spoke occasionally about the children, about logistics, about the kind of practical matters that outlast a marriage because children and property and 28 years of a shared life do not dissolve cleanly just because a lawyer files paperwork. I answered. He said he needed a favor. He was getting married in the spring. I knew this, Cassie had mentioned it, carefully, the way she mentioned anything involving her father's new life, watching my face for information about how to feel. What I did not know was the state of the planning. Daniel described it the way he described most things that had gotten away from him, with a kind of rueful charm that had always been easier to forgive than it should have been. Patricia was overwhelmed. The guest list had expanded past what either of them had intended. His mother was focused on the aesthetic elements, the flowers, the venue's appearance, the seating arrangements as a social statement, and the operational logistics were, in his words, a disaster waiting to be managed. He needed someone to manage them. He asked me. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Does your mother know you're asking me?" He said, "I'll handle Sylvia." I should have known, from 28 years of experience, exactly what that sentence meant. I should have known that "I'll handle Sylvia" was Daniel's way of saying he intended to do nothing except hope the problem resolved itself before it became visible. I said, "Send me the vendor list." The list arrived the next morning. 16 vendors, caterer, florist, venue coordinator, DJ, audio-visual company, photo booth rental, transportation, cake, calligraphy, alterations referral, 2 accommodation blocks, and 4 supporting service contracts I will not name because even now the specificity exhausts me. None of them had been properly contracted. 3 had deposits paid from Daniel's personal account without formal agreements. 2 had verbal commitments only. The venue coordinator had a signed letter of intent that was not a contract. The florist was working from an email chain. Daniel had mentioned, in that same call, that his mother had already spoken to the florist twice. She had opinions about the ceremony arch. She had opinions about the reception centerpieces. She had, apparently, been in contact with the venue coordinator about the table linen color. She had not once, in any of those conversations, asked who was handling the contracts. She never did ask about contracts. That had always been Ruth's department, which was another way of saying it was invisible, which was another way of saying it did not count. I sat at my desk and looked at this list for a long time. Then I opened a new page in my Navy notebook and began. My home office is a practical room. Second-hand desk, solid, good wood, bought at an estate sale 15 years ago. A lamp I chose because the light it gives is warm without being soft. A shelf along the left wall that holds reference binders, a few books, and 1 cardboard banker's box. The banker's box has been on that shelf since 2019. Inside it are 26 Navy notebooks. Not diaries. Not journals. Not feelings. Vendor contacts. Budget reconciliations. Seating arrangements cross-referenced with guest dietary restrictions. Medical appointment coordination. Children's school schedules mapped against Daniel's travel calendar. Event timelines broken into 15-minute intervals. Emergency contacts for every significant occasion the Whitfield family held for 28 years. The complete operational memory of a family. Written in my hand, year by year, in notebooks that nobody asked about and nobody needed to, because Ruth always knew where everything was. I had kept them because I was an accountant by training and an accountant does not throw away documentation. I had kept them because the habit was older than the marriage and stronger than the divorce. I had kept them without, until that November, understanding exactly what I had. The 27th notebook was new. I had bought it in October, same kind, same color, the navy leather I had been buying for over 2 decades from the same stationery supplier. I opened it to the first page and wrote the date and the project name. Whitfield Renner Wedding Coordination. 16 vendors. $84,000 in commitments to be contracted, deposited, and managed. I established an organizational account for the purpose. Every contract would be executed in my name, with that account's contact information as the primary authorization point. Every deposit would clear through it. Every confirmation code, every day of instruction, every vendor's emergency contact, all of it would route through me. This was not strategy. This was simply how I worked. It had always been how I worked. Over the next 4 months, Daniel texted regularly. This surprised me at first. He was grateful in the way people are grateful when someone removes a weight they did not want to carry, warmly, effusively, and without any real examination of why the weight existed or who had been carrying it before. You are literally saving my life with this. The caterer called me with 17 questions, and I had no idea what to say. Thank you for handling all of it. Patricia doesn't know how you do this. Honestly, neither do I. I answered each one with whatever information he needed. Brief, professional, complete. And then, 6 weeks into the coordination, a different kind of text arrived. Mom doesn't know I asked you. Let's keep it that way for now. I know that's not ideal, and I'm sorry. I read it twice. He knew his mother didn't know. He knew from 50 years of living with Sylvia Whitfield exactly what she would do if she found out. He had made the calculation that Ruth's competence was worth the risk, and that Ruth would absorb the consequences if consequences arrived, and he addressed that calculation in the language of an apology. I know that's not ideal. I set the phone down. I picked it up again. I typed 2 words, understood. Sent it. 28 years of practice behind 2 words. I want you to sit with that for a moment. He knew. He knew what his mother would do. He asked Ruth to coordinate his entire wedding anyway, quietly, invisibly, in the background, the way she had always worked, and he asked her to handle the consequences if they came. He asked the woman he had divorced to absorb the risk one more time, because she was good at it and he was not. He called it an apology. He meant it as a request. Stay with me, because what Ruth does next is not what you might expect. She did not withdraw. She did not call him back and renegotiate the terms. She did not forward his text to Cassie or use it as leverage or file it in a place where it might someday be useful. She put the phone face down on the desk, and she opened the 27th notebook to the vendor contact page, and she kept working. Because she did not know how to do things badly. Because 16 vendors were counting on her authorization and 40 guests were counting on a functioning event, and the work existed regardless of the politics behind it. She kept working. And over the next 3 weeks, without drama, without announcement, she completed the most thorough event logistics binder she had ever built. Vendor contacts on page 1, day of schedule in the center section, emergency contingency sheet at the back. Every authorization code and confirmation number accounted for, every scenario she could imagine prepared for, and 2 she hadn't imagined noted when they arose. She was 3 weeks from the wedding when the email arrived. It was addressed to Daniel. It had been forwarded to her address by mistake, a single digit transposed somewhere in an attorney's contact system. She almost deleted it without reading. She almost treated it the way she had been trained to treat things that weren't meant for her carefully, without looking too closely. She almost. But she read it. And when she finished reading it, she set it down. She read it again. And then she picked up her phone and called her attorney. Because what was in that email was not about a wedding. It was never about a wedding. The email arrived at 9:14 in the evening. I know the exact time because my laptop logs incoming mail with a timestamp, and I have looked at that timestamp more than once since then, the way you look at the moment just before something. When everything was still ordinary and you did not yet know it was about to stop being ordinary. 9:14 p.m. A Tuesday. 3 weeks before the wedding. The subject line read, FWD, Whitfield Estate, Draft Amendment Review, Sion F7, B. It was addressed to Daniel. His name was in the header, his email in the original recipient line. Somewhere in the forwarding chain, a single digit had been transposed, his address and mine differing by one number, a clerical error in an attorney's contact system, the kind of mistake that happens when an office is moving quickly and no one double-checks. It should never have reached me. I almost deleted it. I have thought about that moment many times. The cursor over the delete key. The reasonable, trained instinct of a woman who had spent 28 years learning not to look at things that weren't meant for her. I almost. Instead, I read it. The email was 3 pages when printed. Dense legal language, the kind that is designed to be precise and succeeds mostly at being opaque. But I am an accountant. I have been reading documents like this since before Daniel and I were married. I know what the language is doing even when it is trying not to be understood. The subject was the Michigan Lake House. Sylvia had engaged an estate attorney. The engagement had begun, according to the document's internal references, in early 2020. She had been restructuring the property's succession framework, quietly, incrementally, with the kind of patience that is only possible when you are absolutely certain no one is watching. The amendment she was drafting included a tenancy clause. In Patricia's favor. In succession scenarios, if Daniel predeceased Sylvia, or if certain conditions around the property's primary residential use were met, Patricia would hold tenancy rights in the lake house before any inheritance transfer could be finalized. The clause was structured to be legally defensible. It was also structured, in those scenarios, to delay my children's access to what they were owed by up to 15 years. I read it twice. I set it down. I looked at the room around me, the lamp, the dark beyond it, the shelf with the banker's box, the clock on the wall marking the silence of a house where no one else is breathing. Then I read it a 3rd time. The lake house. Not a property I had opinions about. A property I had crawled inside for 14 months, 2 summers, 4-hour drives, contractor calls at midnight, $340,000 managed without a single overrun. My name on every permit and every invoice and every decision made while Sylvia was choosing curtain fabric from a catalog in her living room 300 miles away. The lake house where my children had learned to swim, where Marcus had caught his first fish off the back dock and Cassie had read every book she owned the summer she was 15. Where the kitchen I had redesigned opened onto the porch I had specified, with the original woodwork I had found the craftsman to restore. The lake house where, 2 years after the divorce, the family photo wall had been replaced with images that did not include me, except for one photograph, cropped from 2009, in which I appeared at the edge of the frame. Slightly blurred. Sylvia had been restructuring that property's future since 2020. 2 years of quiet, careful legal work. While I was coordinating her son's first grandchildren's birthday parties and consulting her about the renovation's 10-year maintenance schedule and, yes, spending 4 months managing the logistics of the wedding she was planning to host. I understood something in that moment that I had not understood before. Not anger. Not grief. Something colder and more clarifying than either. I had not been overlooked. I had been managed. I want to stop here. Because this is the moment that changes everything, not just in this story, but in how you understand everything that came before it. Every Christmas where her name wasn't mentioned. Every renovation credit that went to someone else. Every time Sylvia introduced her as Daniel's wife, like it was a temporary position, like the word wife was a placeholder for something that had not yet been determined. None of it was carelessness. None of it was a difficult personality or competitive instinct or the harmless vanity of a woman who needed to be the most important person in the room. It was preparation. She was being erased in layers, first from the credit, then from the memory, then from the inheritance of everything she had helped build. If you thought this story was about a wedding, I need you to understand, it never was. Sylvia, that same evening, was on the phone with the florist's design coordinator, discussing the arrangement height for the ceremony arch. I know this because the florist mentioned it to me 3 weeks later, in passing the number of calls, the level of detail. The particular focus Sylvia brought to the visible elements of an event whose invisible infrastructure she had not once inquired about. She was at her most comfortable. Most certain. The woman in full command of her occasion. She had no idea the email had been forwarded to the wrong address. She had no idea I had read it. She had no idea that while she was specifying peony to lily ratios for a ceremony arch, I was sitting very still in a dark room, understanding, for the first time in 28 years, the exact shape of what had been done to me. I did not call Daniel. I did not call Sylvia. I did not forward the email to Cassie or text Marcus or say a single word to anyone in that family about what I had just read. I printed it. 3 pages, the printer loud in the quiet house, each page coming out warm from the machine. I folded them once, lengthwise, the accountant's fold, the one that fits precisely into the back pocket of a navy leather notebook. I placed them there. I closed the notebook. And then I opened my phone and found the contact I had not used in 14 months. My attorney answered on the 3rd ring. I apologized for the hour. She said don't worry about it. I told her I had received a misdirected email and that I needed her to read it. She said, send it now. I'll look tonight. I sent it. Then I sat at my desk until the lamp felt like too much light, and I turned it off, and I sat in the dark for a while. 3 days later, I was in her conference room. Recycled air. The smell of paper and something faintly chemical, toner, maybe, or the cleaning product they used on the long table. A city visible through the window, moving at its ordinary pace, carrying on its ordinary business, entirely unaware. She had read the email twice before I arrived. She was on her 2nd page of notes on a yellow legal pad when I sat down. She did not look up immediately. She finished her sentence first. Then she looked at me and said, walk me through the timeline. I walked her through it. 2017, Cassie had mentioned, offhand, that Sylvia had been having long conversations with Daniel. Private ones. The kind that stopped when Cassie entered the room. At the time, I had filed it away as Sylvia being Sylvia, managing her son, as she had always managed him. I was wrong. 2018, Daniel had come home from a charity gala. Sylvia sat on the committee for unmentioned, in passing, a woman he had met. Interesting, he said. Uncomplicated. He used that word specifically. At the time, I had not thought about what its opposite implied. I was wrong about that too. 2019, the divorce. Filed in March. The firm Sylvia recommended. The settlement that did not include any recognition of 19 years of uncompensated financial management, which my attorney raised and Daniel's attorney contested until I was too tired to continue and accepted the figure on the table instead. 2020, the estate restructuring begins. Quietly, while I am 300 miles away, learning to be divorced. My attorney wrote something on the legal pad. She did not comment on any of it, not the timeline, not the amendment, not the 19 years. She simply wrote, and when she reached the bottom of the page, she turned it over. She said, "How much documentation do you have?" I thought about the banker's box on my shelf. 26 Navy notebooks in a cardboard box, never thrown away, sitting in my home office like 26 years of answered questions. I said, "All of it." She wrote something else on the legal pad. Then she looked up and said, "Don't contact anyone. Don't change anything. Finish the wedding coordination exactly as planned." I nodded. I already knew. You don't show your hand until the moment it can't be answered. The lake house visit was Cassie's idea. A family gathering, nothing formal, just a long weekend in August, 2 years after the divorce. The grandchildren would be there. It would be good for everyone, Cassie said, in the careful way she said things that she had thought about for a long time before saying. I drove up alone. For hours. The same drive I had made dozens of times during the renovation, though the car was different now and I was different now and the reason for going was different in a way I had not yet learned to name. The lake house looked exactly as I had left it. That was the first thing I noticed, pulling up the drive. The foundation repair, invisible now, the way good structural work always is. The porch railing I had argued for against a contractor who wanted to cut costs. The restored original woodwork above the front door, the craftsman's name still in my phone contacts under L, Lake House Restoration. It looked exactly as I had left it. Because it was exactly as I had left it. I went inside. The hallway runs the length of the house, front door to the back, where the kitchen opens onto the porch and the lake beyond it. Late afternoon light comes through the back windows at an angle in August, long and low and golden, the kind of light that makes a house look like a painting of itself. The smell was wood smoke and cedar. The cedar shelves I had specified for the hallway closet, chosen because they would last and because the smell was clean and because nobody would ever think about them again once they were installed, which was exactly the point. The sound of family came from the kitchen, Cassie's voice, one of the grandchildren, Daniel saying something that made someone laugh. I stood in the hallway alone and looked at the wall. The photographs had been replaced. All of them. The renovation-era pictures, the ones taken that first summer when the house was half finished and the family had come up to see the progress, the ones where I appeared in the background with a contractor's clipboard, the ones that showed the house in its honest, working state, those were gone. In their place, Sylvia and Daniel at the restored kitchen table. Sylvia and the grandchildren on the back porch. Daniel and Patricia at the lake edge, the water behind them bright. A formal family portrait, recent, everyone arranged with the intentionality of photographs that are meant to say, "This is who we are." There was one photograph that included me. From approximately 2009, a summer birthday, I think, one of the children's. I was at the edge of the frame. The image had been cropped so that I occupied perhaps a quarter of the right side. I was slightly blurred, the way people blur when the camera's focus is on someone else and you happen to be standing nearby. I was there. Peripheral. The blur at the edge of someone else's family. I looked at that photograph for a long moment. Then I walked to the kitchen, and I said hello to my grandchildren, and I helped Cassie with dinner, and I did not mention the wall to anyone. But I did not forget it. What I did not know, standing in that hallway, was that Sylvia had made a decision about the photographs the same week the divorce was finalized. I learned this later, from Cassie, gradually, over a series of conversations that Cassie gave me in pieces because she was still learning how to be honest about her grandmother without feeling like she was choosing sides. Sylvia had told Cassie, when the photos were replaced, the house needs to reflect where the family is now. It's not about erasing anything. It's about moving forward. Moving forward. A phrase that sounds like generosity and functions like a door closing. And then, because Sylvia was always most dangerous when she was most comfortable, she had added, Ruth is a lovely woman. She just never quite understood what it means to be part of a family like ours. Some people belong to a chapter, not to the whole book. Cassie had not known what to say. She said nothing. She told me about it 8 months later, in a phone call she had been rehearsing, I think, for longer than she admitted. That call came 2 weeks before the wedding. I was parked outside a copy shop on a gray Tuesday morning, engine off, my phone open to the last vendor confirmation email I needed to review. The copy shop sign buzzed faintly in the window, fluorescent, slightly off in that way fluorescent signs go slightly off after a few years. Traffic moved past on the wet street. Everything ordinary. I had just confirmed the 16th vendor. The logistics binder was complete. Every authorization code, every emergency contact, every contingency I could imagine, in order, cross-referenced, ready. My phone rang. Cassie. Mom. A pause, the kind that means she has been thinking about how to start. I need to tell you something Grandma Sylvia said at dinner last week. I waited. She told everyone at the table that she hoped you were finding your peace. That the transition had been, her word, healthy for you. That sometimes distance is what people need to heal. Another pause. She said it like you'd chosen to step back. Like not being there was something you were doing for yourself. I looked at the copy shop window. Sylvia had reframed my exclusion as my therapy. She had taken the empty chair she had spent 3 years engineering and offered it to the family as evidence of my own journey toward wholeness. She was not the reason I wasn't there. I was the reason I wasn't there. I was healing. I was finding my peace. I was taking the space I apparently needed. She had made my absence into my autobiography. I said, "When is the wedding?" Cassie gave the date. I said, "I'll be there." A silence. Mom, are you sure that's? I'll be there professionally, Cass. I have 16 active vendor contracts. I'll be there because the work requires it. A longer silence. Then Cassie said, quietly, "You've always been the one holding things together. Has anyone ever once noticed?" Cassie meant it as a rhetorical question. But Ruth answered it. She said, "The vendors notice. They call me when anything goes wrong. The florist knows my number. The caterer knows my authorization code. The DJ has my contact on file. The venue coordinator keeps my binder at the front desk." She paused. And then she said, "Professionally, I am very visible. It's only at the family table that I disappear. And if you have ever been invisible at the table and essential everywhere else, if you have ever been the person everyone depends on until the moment they sit down to eat, and then somehow, inexplicably, you are not quite there, you already know exactly what she meant. Drop the word table in the comments if you do. Because Ruth is not the only one who has eaten at that particular kind of dinner. There was one more thing my attorney and I had discussed 3 weeks earlier that I had not mentioned to Cassie. The banker's box on my shelf, the 26 notebooks, contained more than wedding logistics and family event records. It contained 19 years of financial documentation from Daniel's architecture firm. Every budget reconciliation I had produced. Every financial model I had built. Every quarterly report I had written from a desk with no nameplate for a firm I had never been salaried to serve. My attorney had asked a colleague to calculate the market rate for that work. The figure she came back with was $1.2 million. 19 years. $1.2 million in professional services, uncompensated, undocumented in the divorce settlement because Daniel's attorney had contested it and I had been too tired to fight. The documentation still existed. It had always existed. It was sitting in a cardboard box in my home office in 26 narrow-ruled notebooks that nobody had ever thought to ask about. It had not been used yet. I ended the call with Cassie. I sat for a moment with the phone in my lap, the copy shop sign buzzing, the gray street moving outside the windshield. Then I picked up the navy notebook from the passenger seat, the 27th, the current one, worn at the top corner now from 4 months of daily use, and I opened it to the vendor confirmation page, and I wrote the last entry. Vendor 16. Confirmed. Authorization on file. I closed the notebook. I drove home. I made tea. I sat at my desk and opened the notebook to the Day of Logistics binder, the section I had spent 3 months building, the one that covered every contingency I could imagine and 2 I hadn't thought of until they happened. I read through it once. Everything was in order. Every vendor. Every authorization code. Every emergency contact. Every instruction I would need, and a few I hoped I wouldn't. And then I turned to the last page, the one I had left blank for exactly this purpose, and I wrote one sentence at the top. The outline for the day I had already decided I would be ready for, no matter what happened when I walked through that venue door. I had been at the venue for 16 minutes when Sylvia found me. 16 minutes. I know because the florist's assistant had logged me in at 8:31 a.m. That is what the sign-in sheet shows, my signature in the time column, the morning delivery authorization initialed beneath it. The florist's sign-in log is a legal document of sorts, the kind kept for insurance purposes, and it recorded exactly what I was doing at that venue and exactly when I arrived to do it. Independent. Third party. Before Sylvia said a single word. I mention this because what Sylvia said afterward was that I had appeared uninvited and needed to be removed. The sign-in sheet says otherwise. But I am getting ahead of myself. The loading dock at 8:31 smelled like cold water and white lilies. The refrigerated van had its back doors open, 2 assistants working quickly in the cool morning air. The wheels of their trolleys loud on the concrete as they moved the first arrangements toward the service entrance. The florist's assistant had her clipboard ready when I came around the corner. Mrs. Whitfield. She ran her finger down the sheet. Authorization for morning delivery. Just need your sign-off here and initials on the sequence. I signed. I initialed. We confirmed the load order. Ceremony arch first, then reception centerpieces, then the smaller arrangements for the cocktail hour tables. She thanked me. I went inside. Through the service corridor, past the prep kitchen, quiet still, the breakfast things already cleared, the catering team not yet in position, and into the entrance hall. The hall was filling slowly. Morning light through the east windows, the kind of light that turns oak paneling gold. The catering cart near the far wall, fresh coffee, the smell of it warm against the stone. Through the garden doors, the sound of chairs being arranged, the low scrape of them on flagstone, staff in black moving with practiced quiet. I had my notebook open to the vendor contact page. I was looking for the catering manager's name. And then I heard the footsteps. She positioned herself before she spoke. That is the detail I want you to understand. Sylvia did not react, she arranged. She crossed that entrance hall and placed herself between me and the main doors in a way that ensured the guests who were filtering through would see her face and mine and the space between us. 37 people. I know this because the venue coordinator confirmed it later, going through her morning guest log. Sylvia looked at me with the expression I had catalogued across 28 years, patient, composed, faintly sorrowful, the look of a woman performing reluctant necessity, and she said, "Ruth, this isn't appropriate." I held my notebook. I don't know what Daniel told you, she continued, but showing up here today to his wedding, it's embarrassing. For you, more than anyone. Her voice was pleasant, conversational. The kind of voice that sounds, to anyone listening at a distance, like kindness. The family has moved on, Ruth. It's time for you to do the same. I think, deep down, you know that. Someone near the catering cart had gone very still. She took one step closer. If you don't leave now, I'll need to ask someone to help you out. And I don't want that for you. I really don't. The small pause she always used before the finish. You've always been a lovely woman. You've just never quite understood what it means to be part of a family like ours. She said it the way she had always said it, like an observation, like a gentle truth, like concern. Like she hadn't been saying it, in one form or another, since a Christmas dinner in 1994. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I closed my notebook, tucked it under my arm, and walked back the way I came. I want to be precise about the walk. Not rushed. Not dignified in a performed way. Simply even. The pace of a woman who has somewhere to be and is going there. Heels on stone through the entrance hall. Heels on gravel through the service exit. The sun was already warm on the car park asphalt. I found my car. I opened the door. I did not slam it. I sat down. I placed the navy notebook in my lap, both hands resting on the cover, not gripping, resting, the leather warm from being held, and I did not start the engine. Behind me, the venue continued. I could hear it faintly, a chair, a voice, the particular ambient sound of an occasion being assembled. 37 people settling back into a morning that had briefly paused and was now resuming. I waited. The first call came 9 minutes later. The florist's assistant. Her sign-in sheet for the ceremony arch setup required my authorization to proceed. Without my sign-off, they could not begin placement. They were at the loading dock with the arrangements on the trolleys and nowhere to take them. I answered. I told her I was still available to authorize and would communicate a decision shortly. I did not communicate a decision. 21 minutes after I had walked out, the catering company's kitchen manager called. The prep schedule, my prep schedule, the one in my binder, the one the venue's copy did not match because I had updated it 3 days ago, required my sign-off before his team could open the prep kitchen. Without it, they could not begin. The ceremony was in under 2 hours. I told him the same thing. Available. Communicating shortly. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat. 31 minutes. The DJ. There was a contract dispute, an equipment upgrade the venue had verbally promised and then tried to walk back, a situation I had been managing by text for the past week, the resolution documented in my binder under AV contingency notes. Page 4. Without my binder and without me, the DJ had no resolution and no leverage and a venue coordinator who was now fielding too many calls to deal with one more. I told the DJ I had the documentation. I would be in touch. 40 minutes. The venue coordinator herself. Her voice was careful, professional, controlled, someone who had worked events long enough to recognize when a morning was going sideways and when it was going somewhere worse. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, I need to let you know the final seating chart revision. The one from 3 days ago. We don't have the updated version. The copy we have is the one from 6 weeks out. I need your binder. I understand, I said. I'll be in touch shortly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mrs. Whitfield, is everything all right? Yes, I said. I'm just working through a few things. Inside the venue, I learned later, Sylvia had turned to the coordinator within 5 minutes of my leaving. That's been resolved, she said. The pleasant tone. The practiced certainty. The woman who just left, that's been handled. The venue coordinator looked at her. Which woman? The one I just spoke with. In the entrance hall. Mrs. Whitfield? A brief pause. She signed in the florist this morning. She's the coordinator of record for the event. Sylvia said, "Excuse me." And the venue coordinator, who had 16 vendor calls incoming and 40 minutes of ceremony prep unfolding and a seating chart revision she could not access, said, as carefully as she could, "Every vendor contract for today is authorized through Mrs. Whitfield. The catering prep schedule, the florist setup, the AV, all of it requires her sign-off. She's been our primary contact for 4 months." Sylvia said nothing. The coordinator's phone rang. She answered it. She turned away. And Sylvia stood in that entrance hall, the same hall where she had delivered her verdict 37 minutes ago, in front of 37 people, with the confidence of a woman who has never once been wrong about who belongs where and understood, for the first time, that she had expelled the infrastructure. Not a guest. Not a desperate ex-wife. The infrastructure. And it was sitting in a car park in a Navy notebook, and it would not move without a decision from the woman she had just told to leave. She crossed that car park alone. No guests. No intermediary. No staff member sent ahead. Just Sylvia Whitfield, 78 years old, champagne silk, heels on warm asphalt, walking toward the car of a woman she had publicly humiliated in front of 37 witnesses 43 minutes ago. And Ruth watched her come. She did not start the engine. She did not call anyone. She sat with the notebook in her lap, both hands resting on the cover, still not gripping, still just resting, and she thought about the first Christmas. About the desk with no nameplate. About the renovation. About the photograph on the wall, cropped so that she was peripheral, blurred, present but not quite there. She did not think about the wedding. She was already beyond that. She was thinking about what she was going to say when the window came down. And she had known, for 4 months, exactly what that was. Sylvia reached the car. She stood at the driver's side window. And for the first time in 28 years, for the first time in Ruth's entire experience of this woman, Sylvia Whitfield did not know what to say first. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at the notebook. And Ruth, very calmly, turned to the first page. Every contract, she said. Every deposit. Every authorization code. She held it up so Sylvia could see the page clearly. This is what's keeping today running. She set it down. Or not running. And then she reached into the back pocket of the notebook and placed something on the dashboard. She did not hand it over. She just placed it where Sylvia could see it. And Sylvia looked at it. And the color left her face. She stood at my window. The asphalt behind her was warm now, the morning having moved past the cool part of itself into something closer to real heat. Through my windshield I could see the venue, white tents, garden chairs arranged in rows, the edge of the guest seating visible beyond the stone wall. A string quartet was warming up somewhere near the ceremony arch. A few bars, then silence, then the same bars again, the particular incompleteness of music that has not yet been given a reason to start. Near the service entrance, perhaps 30 feet from my car, the venue coordinator stood with 2 staff members. They were not looking at us. They were looking at their phones, their clipboards, the logistics of a morning that had stalled. But they were within earshot of anyone who spoke at a normal volume. Sylvia did not know they were there. That was the first thing I noticed when she arrived at my window. She had not surveyed the space before she approached. She had not checked who was near, who was watching, who might be within range of whatever she was about to say. Sylvia Whitfield, who had spent 50 years positioning herself in rooms with the precision of a woman who understood that witness and audience were not the same thing, had crossed that car park without looking. She was rattled. And she did not know it yet. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at the notebook in my lap, navy leather, worn at the top corner, both my hands resting on the cover, not gripping, and something moved across her face that I had never seen there before. Not anger. Not condescension. Not the particular brand of sorrowful patience she had been performing at me for 28 years. Uncertainty. Raw, unmanaged, unfamiliar uncertainty. I let her sit in it for a moment. Then I opened the notebook to the first page, vendor contacts, 16 entries, each one with a contract number, a deposit confirmation, and a primary authorization code, and I held it up so she could see it clearly. Every contract, I said. Every deposit. Every authorization code. I set it back in my lap. This is what's keeping today running. A beat. Or not running. She said, "Ruth, I think there's been a misunderstanding." There hasn't. She shifted. Something behind her eyes was calculating, the old instinct, the one that had never failed her, reaching for the framework that would reposition this. Daniel should have communicated more clearly. If I had known you were involved in a professional capacity, I would never have. Sylvia. She stopped. I reached into the back pocket of the notebook. I took out 3 folded pages, the printout, lengthwise, the accountant's fold, and I placed them on the dashboard. I did not hand them over. I set them where she could see them. She looked at the pages. She looked at the header, the attorney's letterhead, the document reference. Whitfield Estate, Draft Amendment Review, Sion F7, B. The color left her face the way color leaves a face when the body understands something before the mind has caught up. I said, very quietly, "I know about the lake house. My attorney has the draft amendment. We haven't done anything with it yet." A silence opened between us. Not the silence of a room closing over an absence. A different kind, the silence of a woman who has run a long, careful, patient campaign and is now looking at the person who has documented all of it. That, I said, is a conversation for another day. I opened the notebook to the Day of Logistics binder. Right now, I said, I need one thing. An apology. Specifically, for what you said this morning. Publicly, to the people who heard it. She looked at the venue coordinator near the service entrance. The 2 staff members. 30 feet away. Within range. I waited. Sylvia Whitfield had not apologized genuinely, involuntarily, to anyone who had the power to refuse to accept it in 78 years. I do not say this as an accusation. I say it as a fact, the way the renovation invoices are a fact, the way the vendor contracts are a fact. She apologized. Standing in a car park in champagne silk with the ceremony 40 minutes away, in front of a venue coordinator and 2 staff members she had not noticed were listening. She said, "I apologize for what I said this morning." In front of those people. Each word came out separately, like something being pulled out by its roots. I heard it. I nodded once. Then I picked up my phone and authorized the kitchen. I want to tell you what was in that notebook. Not the wedding logistics. Not the vendor contacts or the seating chart or the emergency contingency sheet, though all of those were there and all of them mattered. I want to tell you what was behind all of that. 16 vendor contracts. $84,000 in coordinated commitments, every authorization code and deposit confirmation routing through my name and my organizational account. Every vendor for Daniel Whitfield's wedding. Not one of them had Sylvia's name on a primary authorization line. Not one had Daniel's. Not one had Patricia's. This was the contract against the verdict she had delivered in the entrance hall. You have nothing to do with this family anymore. Spoken to the woman whose signature was the only thing keeping the occasion alive. The florist's sign-in sheet. My signature at 8:31 a.m. before Sylvia said a word. An independent log confirming that I had arrived at that venue in a professional capacity authorized the morning delivery and was documented as the coordinator of record before I ever set foot in the entrance hall. This was the witness against showing up here today is embarrassing the claim, delivered in front of 37 people, that my presence was desperate and uninvited. The florist sheet said otherwise. In ink, with a timestamp. 19 years of financial records from Whitfield Architecture. Every reconciliation I had produced. Every financial model that had made the firm fundable. $1.2 million in uncompensated professional services, calculated at market rate, documented in the banker's box, untouched since the settlement I had been too tired to fight. This was the record against the desk with no nameplate. Against the dinner where I refilled the wine while Sylvia raised a glass to Daniel's success. The renovation invoices. 314 individual project management decisions across 14 months. My name as project manager on every contractor invoice, every permit, every county filing. The paper trail embedded in the walls of the property that Sylvia was currently restructuring in an attorney's office without once acknowledging who had built it. This was the invoice against the photo wall, against the blurred edge of the frame, against the guest who had asked me if I had seen what they'd done with the place. The misdirected email. 3 pages. The Lake House Deed Amendment. The tenancy clause engineered to delay my children's inheritance access by up to 15 years. Printed and folded and sitting on a dashboard in a car park while the attorney who had drafted it sat in his office with no idea. This was the document against 2 summers in steel-toed boots. Against $340,000 managed without a single overrun. Against the kitchen I had designed and the craftsman I had found and the original woodwork that was now the centerpiece of a property being restructured to reduce what my children could one day claim from it. And Daniel's text messages. For months of them, his gratitude, his relief, his warm, written acknowledgement that I was the only person he trusted to make it right. And one message in particular, read and reread, that I had answered with 2 words. Mom doesn't know I asked you. Let's keep it that way for now. I know that's not ideal, and I'm sorry. This was the text against every time I had been asked to absorb the risk of someone else's cowardice and called it partnership. 28 years. That is how long it takes to accumulate 6 receipts that cannot be answered. 6 documents, 16 vendor contracts, 19 years of financial records, 2 summers of renovation invoices, 1 misdirected email, 1 florist who wrote it down, and 4 months of text messages from a man who knew, in writing, that he was asking her to absorb the risk one more time. That is what the Navy notebook contained. That is what Sylvia called a prop. And if you have ever been dismissed by the person who most depended on you, if you have ever been the infrastructure that someone leaned on and the inconvenience they managed in the same breath, you already know that the receipts were never the point. The point was that Ruth knew what she was worth long before anyone else in that family caught up. She did not wave it. She did not recite it. She simply held it the way you hold something that has always been true, even when no one was looking. The notebook was not a weapon. It was a record. It had always been a record. Today was just the first day anyone had to look at it. Sylvia apologized. in front of the venue coordinator and 2 staff members, in the car park of her son's wedding, with the ceremony 40 minutes away. She apologized and Ruth heard it and nodded once and picked up her phone and authorized the kitchen. And then she got out of the car. She walked back to the venue. She went to the staff anteroom that the venue coordinator had set aside. She coordinated Daniel Whitfield's wedding to Patricia Renner for the next 6 hours without entering the reception once. She drove home alone. And she was not angry. She was not victorious. She was something harder to name, and something Sylvia would never, in whatever years remained to her, be able to take back. The drive home took 40 minutes. I remember the motorway lights, the way they come in through the windshield at intervals, steady and indifferent, lighting the car for a moment and then releasing it back to dark. I had the radio off. I did not want music. I did not want voices. I had just coordinated 6 hours of an event I did not attend. I had authorized seating chart revisions and resolved an audio-visual dispute and confirmed the cake-cutting timeline and handled a guest allergy situation that the catering manager called me about at 4:47 p.m. while the reception was in full motion. I had done all of this from a staff anteroom with a folding table and a chair that was slightly too low and a window that looked out onto the venue's service courtyard. Not the garden. Not the white tents. Not the ceremony arch with the flowers I had authorized at 8:31 that morning. The service courtyard. A concrete rectangle with 3 recycling bins and a door wedge. I was not angry about this. I want to be precise. I was not angry. I was not performing acceptance either. I was simply finished. The way a project is finished. The work was done. I had done it correctly. I was going home. The motorway lights came in and released, came in and released. I drove. For days after the wedding, Cassie called. She did not call from home. She called from a coffee shop. I could hear the ambient sound of it, the low hum of an espresso machine, 2 voices somewhere in the background, a door opening and closing. She had gone somewhere public, I think, because she needed the neutrality of it. Because what she was about to say required a room that did not belong to anyone. Mom. A breath. I've been talking to some people. She had spoken to the florist's assistant, who was the sister of a woman in Cassie's circle, a connection Cassie had not known about until the week after the wedding. When the account began moving through the social world the way accounts move when they are true and verifiable and contradict the official version. She had spoken to Daniel. She had asked him directly. She had heard his answer. How long, she said, have you been handling everything while she treated you like that? I sat at my kitchen table. The tea I had made when I got in was going cold. 28 years, I said. A long pause. The espresso machine somewhere in the background. I'm sorry, Cassie said. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I did not tell her there was nothing to be sorry for, because there was. Not guilt, Cassie was not responsible for what Sylvia built. But there was something, and she knew it, and I was not going to take it from her by being gracious about it. Some acknowledgments need to land. I know, I said. We sat on the phone in our separate rooms for a moment. Then she said, What do you need? And I told her, nothing right now. Just this. Marcus took 3 months. His conversation was shorter and harder. He is his father's son in some ways, not in others, and the ways in which he is his father's son made this particular reckoning more difficult for him to reach. He had loved Daniel without examining Daniel. He had loved Sylvia the way grandchildren love grandmothers, completely, with the uncritical warmth of someone who has only ever been on the receiving end of someone's best behavior. Understanding what had been done required him to hold 2 things at once, That the people he loved had failed the person who loved them most. That love and failure are not mutually exclusive. That both can be true and the truth of one does not cancel the truth of the other. He got there. In his own time. His call was 8 minutes long. He said, "I should have paid more attention." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm going to now." I said, "I know." 8 minutes. Everything that needed to be said. 6 weeks after the wedding, I sat in my attorney's conference room. The file on the table was thicker now. Considerably thicker. She had filed a claim for uncompensated professional services against Whitfield Architecture, 19 years of financial management, market rate, documented to the decimal point in 26 Navy notebooks and their accompanying spreadsheets. The paper trail, she told me, was the cleanest she had encountered in 14 years of practice. Daniel's attorney had requested an extension on the response deadline. She had granted it once. 14 months later, we reached a settlement. The number is private. What I will say is that it was enough and that Daniel's attorney did not request a second extension. The Lake House Amendment had been formally challenged. The tenancy clause, the one engineered to delay my children's access by up to 15 years in succession scenarios, had not survived contact with a counterparty who had the original documentation and the time to use it. The revision process took 14 months. Sylvia was not named as a party. Her name appeared in the depositions 7 times. She was not present for any of them. I thought, during those 14 months, about what Sylvia had imagined would happen. She had imagined, I think, that the architecture was invisible, that the estate restructuring would complete quietly, that the wedding would occur without incident, Ruth safely absent, the new chapter firmly established, that the Whitfield family story, the one she had been editing for 50 years, would proceed as written. She had not imagined the misdirected email. She had not imagined that the woman she was restructuring out of the inheritance had spent 4 months holding every vendor contract for her son's wedding in her own name. She had not imagined that the florist kept a sign-in log. She had not imagined, not once in 78 years of managing outcomes, that the woman she had spent 3 decades treating as infrastructure would turn out to have kept the receipts. Sylvia's consequence was not a confrontation. There was no family meeting. No ultimatum delivered across a dining room table. No dramatic moment she could reframe as persecution and carry forward as narrative. There was simply reduction. Her Christmas, the following December, drew fewer people than it had the year before. Daniel's calendar filled with things she learned about afterward. The grandchildren, who had always arrived on Sylvia's schedule, began arriving on their own on weeks Sylvia had not planned for on weekday evenings, in the particular spontaneous way that people visit someone they actually want to see. She had not been cut off. She had reached the limit. The limit of what charm and narrative control can build when the evidence says otherwise. When 3 vendors and a venue coordinator and a florist's written account and a misdirected email and 26 Navy notebooks in a cardboard box have collectively made the alternative version of events impossible to sustain. She simply found, over the following year, that the world she had curated had become smaller. And I found, and this is the part that surprised me, the part one had not thought to prepare for, that I did not feel the particular way I had expected to feel about that. I had expected relief. I had expected something that felt like victory, even a quiet one. What I felt was simpler. I felt the absence of weight I had been carrying for so long that I had stopped noticing it was there. She sat at her kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 months after the wedding. There was a cup of tea going cold beside her. There was a new navy notebook open on the table, the 27th, bought in September from the same stationery supplier, same color, same weight. The soft leather cover still stiff at the spine the way a new notebook is stiff before it has been opened enough times to know the shape of the hand that holds it. The first page had one entry. For words. The narrator does not tell you what they were. She doesn't need to. Because if you have spent any part of your life being the person who showed up, who coordinated, who managed, who documented, who held things together while someone else was thanked for the warmth of the room, you already know what 4 words a woman writes. For the first time in decades, with no one to organize and no one to protect and no one to quietly carry. You already know. And if those 4 words mean something to you, leave them in the comments. Because Ruth is not the only one who needed to write them. The notebook begins as an object. It becomes a record. It becomes evidence. It becomes leverage. And on a Tuesday morning in October, it becomes something else, the first page of a life that belongs entirely to her. Sylvia came to my car window thinking she was coming to collect. She left having finally, for the first time in her life, understood the difference between the person who holds the room together and the person who takes the photographs.